While the Eucharist was the hour that made his day, I think that it's also what strengthened him to go and make disciples. So evangelization, the idea that he went out and taught and wrote and spoke so much, but discipleship more is this, personal encounter that he had with people. And I know there's countless stories of people who met Fulton Sheen and left changed, and people who are coming to know him now after his death who are changed by that. So what do you think about Fulton Sheen and discipleship and the work that he did in the world?
I think the way in which he draws people to Christ, it can come from the words he expresses and the insights he has, but there's oftentimes, I think, the most important witness that we can give to other people is through integrity of life, and this is something that I think really stands out in Sheen's case. That for him, a disciple is someone who takes up the cross, and someone who is intimately familiar with the cross, and with this is also a real sense of humility. In serving, I mentioned that he had the reputation perhaps of being a proud man, but I think there was such great humility in wanting to be a servant of the Lord. And that humility and the cost of discipleship came out in some really painful ways in his life. We alluded earlier to the conflict that was present with Cardinal Spellman, and some people know some of the stories about that, but it's been kind of fairly well established that when he became the director of the propagation of the faith and was responsible for raising money for the missions, that he and Cardinal Spellman had a disagreement at one point. Cardinal Spellman was able to provide some powdered milk that was from the government, and he was able to give that to the missions. But he made a deal with Sheen. He wanted to be able to give this to the missions, and he wanted Sheen to be able to give some of the money from the missions to the Archdiocese of New York. And Sheen said that wasn't right. And that was a stand he made on principle. And that was a painful thing to do, to go against one's own cardinal archbishop. But even Pope Pius XII took Sheen's side on that issue. He said, no, that was the right thing to do. And the story is that Spellman really never forgave him for that. And even later on, when Sheen had been so popular preaching at St. Patrick's Cathedral, there was a time when he wasn't allowed to preach at St. Patrick's, and he preached at St. Agnes instead. And then later on, then the story is also that after Vatican II, Spellman sent Sheen to Rochester thinking that this actually might not be a very easy assignment for him. There might have been a little ill will in doing that. And we mentioned before that he had the reputation of perhaps of being a failure there. Part of what Sheen did in Rochester was to really bring some of the fruits of Vatican II into his life as a diocesan bishop. So he brought different initiatives that really came out of the council. He did a lot of, worked with a lot of ecumenical initiatives, especially concerning the poor, because that's a bond that all Christians can share in caring for the poor and caring for providing housing for the poor, wanting to make sure that they were cared for, and even seeing that church funds were donated to the care of the poor, even wanting to sell a church and to donate that church to provide for housing. And that upset a lot of people because that riled up people who would rather keep their church, and that was part of what became very difficult for him. But he was a man who was very faithful to the church, and so he wasn't liberal enough for the left, but a man who was also very faithful to the council, and so in some ways he wasn't conservative enough for the right. And I mentioned before that he was someone who really did precisely the right thing when it came to any questions of priest abuse. So in my book, I'm not sure that we can say that his time in Rochester was a failure. In my book, that makes him a success. And even though lots of times we don't always get the rewards that we might think that we deserve, Sheen didn't worry about that. And doing the right thing was its own reward. And even if he had to suffer for that, he would suffer with Christ. And to him, I think that's what a disciple means.